we're recording this webinar. So I'm going to bring you through, introduce our speakers, and then I'm going to bring you through the agenda for the webinar, and for after that, then we will jump into the speakers' presentations. So myself, my name is Gary Conley, and I am the IT Operations Manager within ISS, which is the Central IT Services for DCU. And I've been a member of ISS for the last 2 years. And in fact, to my surprise, the journey for DMARCian has been a lot longer than I've been here, which is an interesting part of the story. But as whenever I come in, it became quite clear it was a priority for us in terms of cybersecurity. I also chair the security operations group within our department. So it was a priority for us, and in fact, Sebastian on the call here will take us through that kind of history, and it's an interesting journey of competing priorities and competing threats and risks. So to get us to a stage where we could form a partnership with dmarcian, get the funding to form a partnership with dmarcian, and get to a quarantine level on our outbound email. Sebastian Doris is their cybersecurity architect, and has been obviously one of the main drivers of this standard on securing our email for the obvious reasons of email spoofing that is out there and prevalent at every opportunity in identities. And it was key that we secure those identities for DCU, that they were not going to be used for nefarious purposes and phishing or spear phishing or spoofing various members of staff. We have Robbie Ward was our senior system engineer involved in the implementation project, and it really, I have to say, it really was Robbie, whenever Robbie joined the team, that the project really kickstarted in earnest in partnership with dmarcian for really tracing us. And it's an interesting project, and Robbie will discuss that in his talks around that journey about how it is really it's more of a communication project nearly than a technical project, but it's an interesting story. We have Dermot Harnett, an EU director from dmarcian, and Dermot is a past graduate of DCU, and I think the link came from Dermot, and we got talking, and it was something that was important for dmarcian, that partnership, and I have to say it's worked out very well for us. Matteo Boldrini is their implementation deployment specialist from dmarcian, and work closely with Robbie on the project over the past 4 months, I believe, has been the implementation project. So just to go through our agenda for today, Dermot, I'm sort of just going to be emceeing the webinar, and I'm going to be keeping an eye on the Q&As. Please, if you have any questions throughout the different presentations, put your questions into the Q&A. I'll keep a track of it, and we'll have a section at the end for 10 minutes or so to go through those questions and open it up to the attendees. Introduction. So the introduction will come from Dermot, just to some background on the company. We're going to have, just for some people not familiar with dmarcian and the protocol, Matteo is going to give us a brief overview of that. Sebastian is going to tell an interesting story around the history, a brief but an interesting story of the history of how long he has been pushing this in DCU, and we finally got over the line with it. And then we're going to get into the meat and potatoes with Robbie. He's got the scars to show it for over the last 4 months of badgering people in diverse sections and of DCU to make them aware of dmarcian and becoming compliant with that protocol. Once those are the 3 main talks, or three main sections, we'll break for a Q&A. We'll field some questions then for 10 minutes or so, and then we're just going to finish off with some industry news around dmarcian and some closing remarks. without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to hand over to, I think it's Mattea is going to take the next presentation.
So thank you, Gary, for that introduction, and hello, everyone. By the end of this discussion, I'm hoping that you'll have the necessary information to decide the next steps for your DMARC journey. But first, let's delve into the advantages of DMARC. DMARC stands for Domain-Based Message Authentication, Reporting and Conformance, and DMARC is a free DNS-based control. And that's where dmarcian came into it from the start. That being said, DMARC is more than just an email authentication policy and reporting protocol. It's a critical tool to help combat phishing. And according to a recent report from Cisco, a staggering 96% of all phishing attacks originate from email. However, DMARC goes beyond merely blocking fraudulent activity. It serves as a cornerstone of email reliability, with increasing compliance requirements mandating its implementation. And so what you'll see is that DMARC replaces the outdated email security model of filtering out malicious content and hoping for the best. Instead, it enables email systems to accept only messages that can be positively identified. And you could say this could be seen as a shift which aligns with zero trust principles. As you'll hear later from Mattea, DMARC is receiving a lot of attention lately with the introduction of country and sender advisory and mandates. But let's be clear, a significant benefit of DMARC its potential is really to alleviate the support burden on cybersecurity teams. And yet, implementing DMARC isn't the one-day task, as Gary just mentioned, and Robbie's going to attest to later. It does require that collaboration and coordination. At its core, the implementation of DMARC requires people helping people, and that's what you'll see the great connection between dmarcian and DCU here, people helping people. And that's why I think the DCU story, working with dmarcian and stakeholders across DCU to apply DMARC is so interesting. We view DMARC in dmarcian as the most effective long-term solution to mitigate the substantial risk posed by the attack surface that email represents. When executed correctly, DMARC can help organizations reap benefits far beyond stopping phishing attacks. So let's begin, and let's turn our attention to my colleague Mattea, and he's going to provide insight into the essential elements of DMARC. Please go ahead, Mattea.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to dive now into some critical layers of the email security, as you can see on the screen: DMARC, SPF, and DKIM. These are DNS-based protocols and are some of the backbones of protecting email integrity, ensuring that the emails you receive are authentic and haven't been tampered with. I'm going to start with DMARC, which stands, as Dermot just said, for Domain-Based Message Authentication, Reporting and Conformance. It's a policy-based control mechanism for emails that allows senders to specify how receivers can act on emails sent on their behalf. It ensures that the sender's authenticity by requiring the alignment between the domain in the from address of an email, also called the friendly from, and the domains verified by SPF and DKIM. The alignment is crucial for preventing email spoofing and phishing attacks. DMARC also facilitates domain-based reporting from receivers to the senders, allowing for a much better understanding and control of email mail flows. The policies or stages under DMARC include none, which lets all email through irrespective of the verdict. This is also called the monitoring or testing phase. Then we have quarantine, which places emails that don't align with DMARC in a separate folder, such as the spam folder. And finally, reject, or P equals reject, which blocks the non-aligned emails outright, preventing their delivery altogether. P equals reject is the ultimate goal of any DMARC implementation process, which will fully protect your email domain integrity. On the screen, you can see an example of a DMARC record. Let's remember it's published as a DNS text record for your domain. Next, we have the Sender Policy Framework, or SPF. SPF allows domain owners to specify which email servers are authorized to send emails on their behalf. And this is done using the envelope from, or also called the return path of an email. By creating a list of allowed senders, SPF helps prevent the unauthorized use of your domain in email headers, reducing the risk of spam and phishing attacks. DMARC checks whether the domain provided in the envelope from or return path matches the domain in the from address of the email. And finally, domain keys identified email, or DKIM. It basically adds a tamper-proof seal to your emails. It's a digital signature that ensures that the email's content remains unchanged from when it leaves the sending server until it arrives to the destination. DKIM ties this integrity check directly to the domain and the email contents, adding a layer of authenticity and integrity. It's basically like sealing an envelope with a personalized stamp that only the recipient can verify. DMARC, in this case, checks if the domain in the DKIM signature matches the domain in the from address. And now I believe we're going to listen to Seb, who will talk about the history of how DCU implemented DMARC and reached the quarantine stage. So I'm going to stop sharing. Over to you, Seb.
I think you might be on mute there, Seb.
Seb, you're on mute there.
Nope, that's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I just said welcome to everybody. So yeah, welcome to everyone. I'm going to run through quickly our journey to P equals reject. So I'm the cybersecurity architect here with Dublin City University. I've been here 24 years. I've pretty much done every job you can imagine. So my slides are a little bit busy, but I'll guide you through. It's a timeline, so one moment. So this all started in October 2018, when we identified the need to implement a DMARC policy for the university domains. This is pretty much as the industry was waking up to the need to better protect email identity, to protect against phishing. So as a part of our research internally, we had looked at the market and identified dmarcian as a very good offering. And they were kind enough to give us a free trial. This was hugely valuable to understand what tools were available to help us achieve DMARC compliance. So in March 2019, we made our first budget application and it was rejected. This is very common within organizations. It's just not as high priority as other competing projects. So we decided to shelve the project for the moment. And shortly after that, in August 2020, the Joint Information Systems Community Advisory on DMARC was published. This is a community within education that we listen to their advice very closely. And when JISC is saying you should be focusing on something, you should be prioritizing it within your organization, we take heed. So this brings us down to September 2020. We were successful in a small budget to procure the tools that would allow us to audit our email deliveries and see which ones were compliant with DMARC and which ones were not, giving us, I guess, the ability to scope out a project. So in October 2020, we started our first internal project, and our internal project would cover looking at what tools are available. We already had a little bit of a benefit from the dmarcian trial. What tools are available, what internal resources we would need, and we roughly defined that it'd take us about a year to get from where we are in 2020 to DMARC compliant for the entire organization. And as I have found out, that was being a bit optimistic. In February 2021, we had an external procurement incident. So this involved fraudsters impersonating the university's name and email account to approach vendors around Ireland, asking for goods to be delivered to specific locations and essentially exploiting the weakness in our DMARC policy, which was non-existent at the time. So they were able to impersonate us and damage our reputation. and caused lots of confusion within our procurement department. So all these events help push up the priority. So at that time, we thought, okay, we need to restart our internal project. We need to get looking at the tools again. We need to potentially be arguing for a higher budget. And I guess a lot of you will be familiar, in May 2021, the HSE attack, ransomware attack happened. This raised great awareness at the senior levels of the university about the need to be protecting identities and any weak points in our defenses. DMARC was identified as a weak point in protecting our identities. So this brings us, same on May, the NC National Cybersecurity Center offered an advisory on ransomware, which clearly highlighted the need for DMARC, followed on by the advisory on the Conti ransomware in September, which further reinforced the need to implement DMARC. So in January 2022, we got approval for an enhanced budget, not just tools, but professional services that would allow us to achieve compliance on a much condensed timescale. So in January 2022 as well, the Irish government cybersecurity baseline stance was published, which we are subject to being education within Ireland. And this highlighted, again, DMARC. You're starting to see a trend. Everyone's saying you should be working on DMARC, and we fully agree. We're just getting there. So as a part of that, we went back out, as it's been 2 years now since we had the trial from dmarcian. We went back out, and they were very kind to give us a second trial to reinforce our business case, to better scope the project. These trials are hugely valuable. So we internally restarted the project again, bit of a trend. In August 2023, Robbie joined our team, a very talented systems engineer who we felt was able to take on this project and run forward with it and work with dmarcian, their professional services and great project management, to actually get this completed, and a quite ambitious time frame of 4 months. So this coincided with the fourth and final project restart, which is our final thankfully. And dmarcian professional service were engaged. That was, Robbie will go through a little bit more detail of what that involved. Right after that, in October 2023, we had a C-level incident where the identities of senior people within the university weren't impersonated and causing reputation damage and lots of concern. At this time, we had already engaged with professional services and were well on our way to being DMARC compliant and protecting our identities. In October 2023, Google and Yahoo made the announcement that they were going to be encouraging the entire internet community to be moved to DMARC to compliance. So we had, yet again, these incidents still happen before we get to quarantine or reject. We had another procurement incident, very much the same as I mentioned before. So in March 2024, we achieved our policy of quarantine. So any emails that were not in compliance are quarantined. And in May 2024, we expect to go to reject. I hope people here can learn from some of our mistakes and take something away from that little story, but persistence is key. Never letting it go, watching the industry, pulling on external resources, using them to build your business case, and keep pushing it up. The appropriate resourcing is vital. We're very lucky to get Robbie joining our team, but we had originally envisioned that we could do this with internal resources, but with competing priorities and skill sets distributed throughout our department, or sometimes not in the department, it made it very challenging. So, and never let a good crisis go to waste. The HSE really sharpened everyone's teeth in respect to what can we do to reduce the risk of us becoming next HSE. And our final point here is, it's quite obvious. It's not that hard with the right partner. We're very grateful that we got to work with dmarcian, and we achieved this ambitious 4-month implementation for a reasonably large organization. that brings me to the end of my slides. I'm happy to answer questions within the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Seb.
Okay. So go for it, Robbie.
I'm Robbie Ward. I am the senior engineer here at DCU for over half a year now, and I'm also the technical lead for the DMARCian project. So giving a quick overview on where we started on our DMARC journey. We initially started off by using the dmarcian tools, as Seb said, and that are openly available on the website. And from there, we kind of reach out to them and agree, look, these guys are a great fit for ourselves. So I started off with the project by adding our primary and subdomains to our actual DMARCian portal. After that, I added the DMARC text records and for each domain, and that allowed the portal to start then picking up email traffic on those domains. After a few days of monitoring, it actually started picking up all the applications that were sending emails on behalf of DCU. This was great for myself, as it kind of gave us like a full estimate on what we need to tackle, and it gave us a very easy way to produce a project plan and get each application tackled individually then. So with myself going into this project, I didn't really have much experience around DMARC, to be perfectly honest. I had heard of DMARC before, but never actually implemented a DKIM key or anything like that. But after doing the research, starting smaller with non-critical applications, lower volume emails, and also having obviously the DMARCian team there handy as well. It was great for myself, and it was relatively easy to understand then after that. Once I was comfortable implementing and testing DKIM keys, I then started targeting the key applications or the big heavy email bulk senders. Certain applications that were sending out university events, marketing newsletters, as well as HR emails. After a few weeks, you'll start to notice your DMARC compliance rating going up, and this will give you kind of like a brief indication of how far you've progressed in your DMARC journey. It also kind of gives you a little boost when you kind of start to see those big, heavy bulk email senders, that they're all starting to be compliant. You'll start to see that compliance rating start to shoot up. So it kind of gives you a little bit of motivation, which is great. So what were the challenges I faced implementing DMARC in DCU? Well, communication and emphasizing the importance of DMARC was actually one of the biggest hurdles, as Gary mentioned earlier. There was a lot of back and forth email traffic between myself, departments, as well as third parties. You'll also need to explain to your users, look, DMARC is pretty important. These applications need to be compliant, and trying to emphasize how important it is, instead of the users kind of saying, oh, well, why is he here? Like, this is going to take up some of my time. you kind of need to emphasize, look, this is pretty important, so it needs to get sorted. Because of this, I actually created several email templates that kind of helped me out going forward. The templates were kind of mentioning everything behind DMARC and what it was, what I'm doing, and listing what our SPF and DKIM requirements were then. This was great to quickly send off an email to a department that I know is using a certain application just to get my initial conversation going. But the emails only get you so far. In most cases, it was far easier just to schedule a meeting with them. And that way you can kind of walk them through, look, this is what I'm doing. This is to prevent spam and email spoofing. And if you have the time, look, we'll quickly enable DKIM and you can see what I'm talking about there. Just, sometimes scheduling the meeting was just far superior than sending emails back and forth. So since we're obviously a university, there was obviously a large amount of different systems being used and a variety of different systems. And being honest, I definitely underestimated how many applications were being used. But once our dmarcian portal was up and running, I had a few days to kind of monitor everything. It gave us a full list of the entire list of applications that were sending out emails on behalf of DCU. It was also discovered later on as well that there was multiple departments using the same email platform, but they were actually using their own individual accounts. And this meant having to locate each individual account holder and actually enabling DKIM within that individual account as well. Two examples of this were SendGrid and MailChimp. These are big bulk email senders, and they were used within multiple departments in the university. It was quite hard to actually locate, why the entire application wasn't fully compliant. And then we obviously later on discovered, oh, it's been used multiple times in different departments with individual accounts. So this is kind of where email tracing came in handy. I had to trace multiple mail servers from third-party applications in order to locate the correct department. Some applications were obviously fairly easy to locate, especially when you have email headers like core HR or marketing, for example. You reach out to the HR department, you reach out to the marketing department, say, look, are you using this? Usually they just come back and say, yeah, that's us. But there was several times where they actually didn't come back and say, that's not us. We're not using that. You keep having to dive a little bit deeper, and then you're like, look, here's actually proof that you guys are using it. And they're like, oh yeah, we found the person who's using it. So what actually happens when you make the switch to quarantine? I know Matteo was mentioning this early on, but I just kind of wanted to give you an overview of what actually happens from my side. So, because at the start I didn't really fully understand exactly what was going on, but it'll just give you a little bit of clarification of what actually happens. So if you don't actually have a DMARC policy in place, or it's actually set to none, all the mail sent on behalf of you or your organization will go to the recipient's inbox, just like a normal email goes out. But when you actually make the switch to quarantine, if that sender is not DMARC compliant, the recipient will receive the email, but it'll actually be placed in their junk folder. So I like to think of it as you're either DMARC compliant or you're junk. The reason behind this is that all third-party apps sending emails on your behalf all need to be verified as legitimate senders. Again, this is done through DMARC inspection of the mail, and they either must have a valid SPF or a DKIM record in place. It's good to note here, though, that you don't actually need both records in place. You can have either SPF or DKIM. It's always better to have both. But a lot of people kind of tend to say, okay, look, I can just quickly add these IPs and domains into our SPF record and job done. But it's never really recommended to have multiple IPs and include domains in your SPF record. DKIM is also the newer and more secure security standard, and we think it should definitely take priority over SPF if possible. We kind of tend to use the SPF method as a failover, just in case a critical app went down because of a DKIM key, something happened. At least it has SPF there. So again, going back to my first point, you're either DMARC compliant or you're junk. If neither SPF nor DKIM are in place for third-party apps, they are out of compliance, DMARC compliance. If they try to send an email, it will be flagged as either spam or potential domain spoofing. I kind of like to think about it kind of like going through passport control at the airport. So DMARC is like if you're going up to passport control, and the DKIM key is like your actual passport itself, authenticating your identity. And SPF being like your boarding pass, it's verifying your IP location and your destination. So you kind of go up to the password control agent and he says, look, do you have SPF? Do you have DKIM? You go, no, I don't have the SPF, but I do have DKIM. He's like, right, go ahead. You go, like, second person comes in and he's like, do you have DKIM? No, but I have SPF. They're like, okay, yeah, go on ahead. But if you do not have either one, it's going to be either rejected or put into spam. So it's always good to have one. Okay, so when you make the switch to quarantine, obviously this means that the mails will be allowed through, but if they're not compliant, it'll go into spam. But I want to emphasize that this means that it's actually up to the recipient to contact the IT department. This is likely, someone coming up to IT and asking, why are these emails going to my spam folder? They're never doing it before. You jump onto the machine, you double check the email header. You can see from the email header that it's out of DMARC compliance, doesn't have SPF, doesn't have DKIM. You just inform them. You either go through the steps and enable DKIM or, log a support ticket, get it all sorted, and then it'll go through. But whereas with the reject policy, since the sender will get an immediate bounce back, this obviously means that the mail failed, and then the sender will have to come forward and say, look, there's a problem here. We're getting bounce backs. Do you know what's going on? So again, fully clarifying everything. Quarantine is on the recipient. Reject is on the sender. It's it's also good to note though that you don't need to make the switch to immediate fully quarantine or fully reject. You can do this in stages. You can do it by percentages. So you can start low, say at a 25% model, and then only 25% of those non-compliant emails will either go to spam or reject. This will also limit the amount of help desk you guys get in, which is obviously great for the help desk team. So what are the benefits? Well, the main benefits for us here in DCU was the security, the visibility, and the controllability aspect of everything. For the security side, it helps prevent email spoofing. Obviously, spoofing has become a lot worse in recent years, unfortunately. And anything that helps prevent spoofing is obviously a major plus for an organization. We also had an old subdomain, matadiri.dcu, which was heavily spoofed. I actually switched the DMARC policy over to reject for that subdomain. So now all those untrusted emails are now being bounced back to the sender. So no untrusted emails are getting through, which is great. As for the visibility side of things, as I mentioned before, that we could easily see a large list of the applications that were sending emails on behalf of our domains here in DCU. We could also see the volume of emails being sent as well, which is extremely helpful. Some of these apps weren't actually some of these applications weren't brought to IT's attention, so we didn't actually know that certain applications were being used throughout the different departments. And obviously having that knowledge is fairly critical, which kind of leads into my controllability aspect. Since we had great visibility over DCU's departments, we are now starting to put in policies in place to try and condense those policies down for the departments. It means, if there's multiple bulk email senders for multiple different departments, why can't we just use one or maybe two? Having the high level control also means that any new system coming in must be DMARC compliant as well. So any skills required to implement DMARC in your organization? To be honest, you don't even need that much experience, but I would suggest you have two aspects with a little bit of background knowledge in maybe. The first being DNS configuration. I had previous experience around DNS, and it definitely does come in handy, because you will be adding quite a lot of text and CNAME records. But again, you don't need huge amount of experience. You can always just research things. It's not a big deal. I'd suggest just starting small. Again, start with non-critical apps. Get used to implementing DKIM, add the records, test them afterwards, and it becomes fairly repeatable then after that. You will need to get used to the mail tracing techniques throughout the project, though. I had to trace quite a lot of mail server IP addresses in order to locate common patterns in mail. And you use that to try and determine which department you're going to speak to, or which, application admin you need to talk to. Once you have the correct department, you reach out to them, mention, look, they're not compliant, and you either talk them through enabling DKIM, or you pretty much get onto third party and log a ticket that way. Sometimes it'll take a good few conversations of back and forth, but again, if you just schedule a meeting, it's usually the best way forward. I'll finish up by quickly going through a few recommendations I have whenever you are thinking about implementing DMARC. So my advice is just to gather a few engineers to be part of your DMARC team. I would advise assigning each engineer an application and get them to go through the troubleshooting steps, and make sure that they go through mail tracing techniques if need to, and locate the correct department and get them to communicate with that department how important this is to implement. Communication is definitely going to be your biggest hurdle by far, but it's obviously key to progression here. Make sure you test your DKIMs at the end by sending a test email. I stupidly sometimes skipped over this step and immediately regretted it a few days later. It's very easy to think that you've fully implemented DKIM, but you stupidly didn't press save or assign it to the sub accounts, for example. So SendGrid being a big player here, you have to assign DKIM to the sub accounts. I did not do that and thought everything was sorted. Turns out only one account was sorted. So again, you have to go back through it all, implement DKIM, or at least assign them all down. So test your DKIMs by sending a test email. And now on to my final point, make sure you document your findings. It'll make it so much easier for you guys. It'll also make sure that there's no confusion or overlapping of work between your DMARC engineers. It'll also give you a bit of a timeline when you need to rotate your DKIM keys in the future, especially for critical apps. You also know exactly who to contact in what department if you ever have an issue as well. So again, I'd highly recommend you document your findings and all the DKIM keys. So with that, I wish you all the best of luck if you're ever thinking of implementing DMARC, and I definitely feel it's definitely worth the time and the resources you put into it, purely for the controllability and obviously the mail spoofing preventions. Yeah, I fully agree that it should be implemented everywhere. So thanks all for listening. I'll pass you over.
Thank you, Robbie. Very interesting. I'd like to see the way you beat yourself up there, but at the end, it was totally unnecessary. We're all human.
Yeah, for sure.
Sometimes we all forget to hit the save key. Yeah, it happens. But yeah, thanks very much to each of the different speakers. We have quite a few messages coming in. And Seb, so I see you've been answering some of them. We'll concentrate on the open questions that haven't been answered, maybe as a discussion point. Like we have a question from Jennifer Wilson. Have you ensured shadow IT does not occur only being identified when emails don't send, such as newsletter platforms, etc.? Not sure who would take that.
I'm happy
Yeah, do
taking
you want to take
that,
that one,
if
Seb?
that's okay. So the tool, the dmarcian tool, the reporting engine, identified which mails we did not have an SPF or a DKIM key for, and that we would have deemed unauthorized. So this helped us, the reporting interface helped us identify which mails were coming from Shadow IT. Since we went to a P equals quarantine, that's our present policy. Anybody that we haven't got a DKIM key or DSPF records created for, they will have to come to us, or their mail will go to quarantine. We are expecting to go to P equals reject, which means that the sender, who's potentially impersonating the identity of DCU, will then be alerted that their mail is getting rejected because of a DMARC failure. Then they will, of course, come to us, and this should effectively get rid of Shadow IT sending mail on behalf of the university.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we're almost pretty much at like 99.9% DMARC compliant on all of our DCU emails currently, and with the quarantine level, like, and I think we're very close this week. Robbie, you know, we were discussing this week about moving to a percentage reject level, and seeing how that goes, and moving then quickly up to the 100% by the start of May. I know that was a question that Jennifer had as well. The next question from Dmitry Grigoriev. Isn't the mail handling at the recipient end decided by the recipient email address, or all of them obliged to honor DMARC? Okay, Matteo.
I might take this one just from a protocol point of view. It is true. Yes, there are ways. Ultimately, is the recipient administrator of the email system that receives the email that can decide to override a DMARC verdict. Although the vast diffusion of the protocol, the vast adoptance of the protocol, and basically the benefit that it adds in protecting someone's domain, I would say equals the number of, or reduces the number of instances where you have a so-called override. There might certain specific cases, so it might be something necessary at some point during say, for example, an implementation project, when you have issues reaching certain account owners and administrator identifying, you may want to, temporarily override the policy. But it's thankfully it's a minority, and again, as I said, the benefits of the protocol outnumber kind of that necessity.
Thanks, Matteo. We have a question from Ash Moran. Have you found instances where you've had directives in your SPF record you simply didn't need, which DMARC helped identify? I think that became quite clear as we started moving through the project. Robbie, you want to take that one? I mean, I think we debated this as well about between SPF and the DKIM keys, or preference obviously being the DKIM key, which is a stronger protocol of identifying the email, and we're actively working to reduce that SPF record.
Yeah, exactly. We tend to more lean towards DKIM for sure, but it's always better to have both, possibly as a failover. Certain applications, in my opinion, don't particularly need SPF because they have a huge range of servers being sent out, or sending out emails and stuff. So we would kind of limit those SPF records as much as we can and primarily focus on DKIM.
Great. We have a question from Noel Cronin. Have you an estimate of the number of apps that were sending emails? My goodness, Robbie, you want to take that one?
Yeah. I'm gonna put a number in my head. I'm gonna say at least 25. I would say. I put in a lot more DKIM keys than 25, but yeah, there was roughly around 25 applications. Yes.
So that's bulk email senders, or even individual email mail servers sending.
Yeah, like it could be small enough applications just sending alerts, for example, or it could be huge marketing newsletters being sent out with 1,000 emails going out at one time. It just depends, but yeah, rough estimate of about 25 applications, but I'd definitely put in a lot more deacon keys than 25.
Okay, we have a question from Wayne Ahern. Were there any really problematic third-party services that were difficult to work with? I'd say those bulk email senders. Was any particular one difficult to work with?
I won't say that there's any particular hard third parties to work with. There's third parties that actually don't support Deacon whatsoever, that they haven't implemented into their system yet. Most do, in all fairness to them, but there was a fair few that didn't. But their implementation is somewhat similar in certain applications and then very different in others. So it could be a simple 2-minute job on one application, and then it could be possibly like half an hour, nearly an hour, trying to figure out how to implement it for another application. Usually more the easier route than the hard route, though.
Yeah, and as we say, once moved to a reject level, that gives us kind of control of any new bulk email senders come in, because they're going to have to be DMARC compliant.
Exactly.
We have a question from Kieran O'Hare. After implementing quarantine, have you noticed an increase in queries from DC staff, students about emails that sent being quarantined at the destination? So I guess ending up being in spam, or do you think the IT department at the destination is taking the support hit?
I suppose I'll take that as well.
Yeah.
We were quite high in our compliance rating before we switched to PE equals quarantine. So there was a very low number of emails actually been sent over to quarantine. Most of the situations that came back over to my desk, someone's having an issue with certain emails not going through, I quickly check with them. It usually takes a 5-minute job just to verify that, yeah, that email isn't DMARC compliant, and I quickly run through the steps with them. Within half an hour, they're up and running again. It's usually not a big deal, but I think only came across a handful of those.
Perfect. And a question here from Ash Moran. DMARC setup can be a bit of a mixed bag. While hiccups are pretty universal, others seem to pop in specific fields. For example, the education sector is notorious for having departments often go their own way, with tech, and sometimes sidelining IT service. That can lead to quite a scavenger hunt to get everything DMARC compliant. What's your experience? That is all of our experience.
Exactly that. Yeah, Ash, that's exactly what we went through for sure.
I mean, as I say, in the university is a very diverse environment where people they can innovate on their own, but this is where it kind of leads to, and we had this is what this project was around, about reining in these different departments to make them more secure in their communications. So yeah, you could absolutely describe it as a scavenger hunt, which we're always great at.
I got used to it after a while.
Yeah. Okay, that's all the questions coming in on the Q&A. We're gonna just do a few slides on industry news from Matteo, and that should close us off. And if there's any questions, final questions, please pop it into the Q&A, and we can get those at the end.
All right, I believe anybody can see the screen, yeah? All right, so thank you, Gary. Here we're discussing some critical updates in the email security, specifically regarding DMARC. As we know, as we've seen, the protocol is seeing a significant traction and mandate across different regions and sectors. So I'm going to take a look at some of the latest developments, starting with the Google and Yahoo requirements that I'm sure a lot of people know. In a major shift aimed at combating phishing and ensuring email authenticity, Google and Yahoo announced back in October 2023, as Seb reminded earlier, that a series of enforcements would mainly target organizations sending more than 5,000 messages daily into either of these giant mailbox providers. And starting in April this month, 2024, they'll begin rejecting small portions of non-compliant email traffic. And from June 2024, the gradual enforcement will target email sending domains not implementing DMARC policies, basically anybody without a P equals none as a minimum DMARC record. And furthermore, marketing messages must also include a one-click and subscribe feature. So there's a number of requirements. And the ultimate goal, anyway, should be for any organization to adopt a P equals reject DMARC policy, which is, again, a big step towards eliminating all fraudulent emails. If we move then on the financial sector, the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, or PCI DSS, version 4, will be making DMARC implementation mandatory. By March 2025, any business involving processing, storing, or transmitting cardholder data must have DMARC in place with a policy of either P equals quarantine or P equals reject. And that will safeguard against phishing attacks. That's the main driver. Again, an excellent example of the critical role that DMARC can play in protecting even financial transactions and information. For instance, you can think about, I'm going to give a couple of examples of areas that and industries that might be impacted. Healthcare institutions handle a lot of sensitive patient data, and they're some of the prime targets for phishing attacks. The banking sector, a lot of financial transactions also will benefit a lot from more stringent DMARC policies. Now, if we take a look at the European landscape, as you will see in the map as well, we're seeing a coordinated effort to bolster email security across the different member states. Various countries have started implementing guidelines, and in some cases, regulatory requirements mandating the use of DMARC to protect against spoofing and phishing. The initiatives are part of a broader push towards enhancing cybersecurity and protecting digital communications within the European Union. Some examples, the Netherlands and Denmark are examples of countries currently mandating DMARC, specifically for public agencies. And in Ireland, as Seb mentioned earlier, the National Cybersecurity Centre published in 2022 the document Baseline Standards for Public Bodies, which basically requires the implementation of DMARC. So as a conclusion, the push for DMARC implementation across the big players like Google and Yahoo, financial standards like PCI DSS, and the European Commission and members is moving towards a global move towards a more secure email communication ecosystem. So I'm going to hand over now to Dermot for some closing remarks, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Mattia. In closing, I'd first of all like to thank everyone, my colleagues at DMARcian and at DCU, for your presence and attention today. Some takeaways that you might want to consider. On our website, we have many free tools and resources. You could check your DMARC record, try and understand what your next step in your DMARC journey should be. Also linked on our website, there are some free tools like the SPF Inspector, the DKIM Inspector, the DMARC Validator. We have lots of videos and blog posts. You could start a free trial, which could help you understand your email sending infrastructure and part domains. And then finally, why not become a certified DMARC professional and sign up to the DMARC Academy? So thanks again for your attention, and back over to you, Gary, and thank you.
Thanks, Dermot. We've a final question there from Jeremy Lopez regarding non-compliant forwarded email reported by DMARcian. Have you ever contacted the external recipient regarding the failures? If so, how did it go? And I'm just kind of conscious of your previous slide there, Dermot, like of all those resources you have on the DMARcian website in terms of the different, as we went through it, Matteo, like the different bulk senders, and the guidance about how to make them DMARC compliant for each of those ones. So that would be identifying who was sending it, or Robbie would be doing that, and then guiding them through that information from DMARcian. So that's really kind of was the meat and bones, as we said, Robbie, for the whole project. So yeah, I want to just thank our speakers today. I just have one final sort of closing slide. I just want to thank our speakers today and all of the attendees. We just have a website there, just a sort of a page on our own DCU website there for some information, some background information on like our DMARC information really for it's kind of internally, like and I'm sure all of the attendees are quite kind of up to speed with the Q&As on that page. But if you have any questions, please, you can reach out to myself at that email address, and I can get in touch with you. We are recording this webinar, and I can provide a recording of this webinar if you so wish. Please, can you reach out to me on that email, and I can provide it to you. So I don't think we have any other questions, but we have just one more, I think, from where is it? Yeah, just some thank yous coming in, which is, we appreciate that. So I think we're up on time. Again, just thank our speakers. Thanks all the attendees for joining. I hope that was informative, and please reach out if you want any further information. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.